Welcome to the Veteran Summit, Jane Stevens, and thank you so much for being here. I have been really looking forward to this and to the discussion that we will be having today about adverse childhood experiences and all the work that you have done and the pioneering efforts that you have made, that this is now getting global attention and is so important. I'd like to start, if I could, with a specific example of the childhood of one of the veterans I interviewed, Justin Miller, who gave testimony in July of 2019 about childhood trauma and the incredible impacts of childhood trauma. So I will read directly in his words. This is the statement of Justin Miller, Deputy Executive Director, Objective Zero Foundation. My name is Justin Miller. I am a veteran of the United States Army. I was medically retired after serving 11 years in the military, and I am now serving our veterans and their loved ones as a civilian. I am the Deputy Executive Director and co-founder of Objective Zero. And that is a wonderful app that we talked about during our interview. He said, I faced many challenges growing up as a child of divorced parents. I was exposed to many things at a young age that I shouldn't have been. I had several instances of childhood trauma that I knew weren't normal to most, but I hadn't realized the impact they had on my life until I became an adult and started seeking help to deal with my PTSD and depression. In the fall of 2018, I went to a program called Save a Warrior, where they gave me the Adverse Childhood Experience test. It was then I realized, or I remember, playing doctor with these girls as a kid. At this time, he was 4 years old. He said, I was later threatened by their father when he found out and punished by my parents. Then other inappropriate moments with an adult came a couple of years later. My best friend accidentally shot and killed himself when we were in 4th grade. I was supposed to be at his house that day. By going to group therapy in school, I mentioned that and how things could have been different. Someone then said it was my fault because I didn't go to his house, and that always stuck with me. My dad went to prison for 3 years when I was 7. I would always get laughed at because my dad didn't make it to career day. When my dad finally did get out of prison, I would do anything to have that bond with him and gain his approval. At 11 years old, I was introduced to marijuana and alcohol in the same day by my dad. He wanted me to do the things he was doing, so I also wouldn't tell on him. When I was in the 7th grade, my 18-year-old uncle hung himself in the basement of his house. I was a wreck. I was sent to the office at school, and when I started to open up to my counselor and told her what happened, she asked me if I could say one last thing to him. What would it be and how did I feel? I told her I didn't know what to feel. My dad always told me boys don't cry, that if I wanted something to cry about, he would give me something to cry about. Before I could even think about it, the lunch bell rang. She said, well, there's the lunch bell. You should probably go. After my traumatic childhood, I tried to stay numb and intoxicated all the time. During Save a Warrior is when I realized I was repeating the cycle with my children and then decided it was time to break that cycle. So I think that's an incredible example of numerous adverse childhood experiences that have happened. And for this particular veteran, he had no idea the impact it was going to have on him. And he was medically discharged. He served for 11 years, and he was medically discharged because of his PTSD and other injuries. I would really love to find out more about how you became involved, because this is such incredible information, this study that was done on ACEs, and how I've given examples, but how are ACEs defined according to the study? And what is the study?
So I'll explain how I got into this, and then I can tell you a little bit about the study itself.
Great.
I had been very interested in reporting about violence epidemiology for as long as violence has been called an epidemic. And the CDC had declared that in the mid-'80s. But there were things that just didn't click, which was, if there was a family of 4 and one of those siblings murdered somebody or was murdered, and the other 3 didn't, I asked the epidemiologist, I'm a journalist, I should say, and I did a lot of stories about it. I would ask the epidemiologist, why that difference? And they said they just escaped, and that didn't seem to make sense to me. So in 2004, I ran into a person who was doing a workshop on sex abuse, children's sex abuse. And so she said, have you heard about the ACE study? And I said, no. And so she told me about it, and I just thought, wow, this is the answer. The other 3 didn't escape. One may have become morbidly obese, another may have become an alcoholic. Maybe one of the others did succeed, but was an overachiever, and had relationship problems and heart problems afterwards. Mm-hmm. Unless there's intervention, you always pay the piper with this. So that was my introduction to ACEs and the ACE study. And I did a story about it. And then I started looking into other parts of ACEs science, which includes the neurobiology of toxic stress, which are caused by ACEs. And then the long and short-term health consequences, because it's already making changes in your genes, as well as every single body system you have. And then looking into epigenetics and how it's transmitted from generation to generation. And then resilience research, how the body is the brain wants to heal, the brain is plastic, you can heal from this. So about 2012 is when all these pieces came together, and now there's a body of ACEs science that deals with all this. The ACE study was done it actually was around for about 25 years, kind of like the Framingham Heart Study. And it did its first publication in 1998, and it has done 70 publications since. So there's quite a bit of work that's been done by the ACE study folks at the CDC and Kaiser. But then as people learned about it, now there are, if you just do a search in PubMed for adverse childhood experiences, there's thousands of research papers that deal with some part of the effects of ACEs on the body and the brain. It's pretty interesting.
Was this study that the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, when they were doing this study initially, weren't they working with overweight individuals, and then they started to link together certain things that were a common experience, which was often some kind of sexual assault? I mean, didn't the adverse childhood experiences almost sort of come about through serendipity, that they started looking at the pattern and thought, wait a minute, there's something going on here. There's a reason why they're having success at their weight loss and they're dropping out, or something else is going on. And I thought that was, if that is an accurate assumption about this, that what they found turned into such a bigger thing than what they were originally doing. And they came to define it as an initial list of, was it about 10 things maybe that were on the initial list of what were considered experiences that were adverse, like if a parent died, or if there was a divorce, or somebody went to prison, or if there was any kind of physical violence, drug abuse, alcohol, any of those types of things were in that initial list. But then later, didn't they expand to include other things in that list too? Is that?
Yes, they did. And how it started, it was completely by accident that Vincent Folletti stumbled across this. And it was just Dr. Folletti at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And he was running a weight clinic. And they have, as he said, they have the technology to make everybody, you know, a small size. You know, it's just a matter of drinking this liquid that has all the nutrients you need for as long as you need to lose the weight you need. So you can lose 250 pounds in a year if you need to. But what he found out, that was half of the people who were in the weight clinic dropped out, even though they were successful. And he couldn't understand why. So he did a bunch of interviews and was getting nowhere. And finally, he accidentally asked, how many pounds did you weigh when you were, when you first had sexual relations? And I think it was also, how many pounds did you weigh when you were married? And so he switched those up somehow. And the person he was interviewing burst into tears and said, I weighed 40 pounds and it was with my father. And Dr. Folletti thought, what did I just ask? You know, he didn't understand. And he thought, well, maybe I'm onto something. So he asked people subsequently that they were interviewing, and then wondered if he was injecting bias into it. And so he asked other people to ask the question. And that's where he found that there was a relationship between people, men and women, who'd been sexually abused and being overweight. Yeah, obviously it was a weight clinic. Yeah. So he had about, I think he published a study that had 300 people or so from the weight clinic. And he took it to I did a presentation, I think it was it was a psychiatrist convention, and they were specializing in obesity, and they practically booed him off the stage. And the reasoning was, why do you believe what your patients told you? And Dr. Folletti's response was, you mean you don't? And so at the dinner that night, he was sitting next to a guy from the CDC who happened to be a friend of Dr. Robert Anda, who ended up working with Dr. Folletti on the ACE study. And this is a guy named Dave Williams, Dr. David Williams, and also an epidemiologist. And he said, well, I think what you have is really interesting, but you need more than 300 people. And Dr. Folletti said, not a problem. I run a preventive health organization within Kaiser Permanente, and I can get 50,000 people a year. So that's how the ACE study was born. They managed to scrape together a little bit of money and develop the questionnaire. You know, took a couple years of research to see which things they should ask about. And I mean, the things that were obvious were physical abuse and sexual abuse and things like that, but they really didn't know what else to look at. So they didn't actually know what they were going to get, because most people had looked at abuse within a particular silo.
Mhm.
What this did was looked at it all these adverse childhood experiences. And then they discovered that, wow, everybody has them, and they have a lot of them. And, or some people have a lot of them. And it doesn't matter which ACEs you have, you're going to have statistically the same outcome, because the brain can't distinguish between sexual abuse and physical abuse and having a parent in jail. It just sees toxic stress from whatever abuse you're having. So they were shocked. They didn't really know what they had. And when they published in 1998, there were a couple people who went, whoa, this really changes everything. But most of the world didn't. And so it wasn't until a few people started, spreading the word. They were going around and giving lectures all the time, but there was no uptake or interest. The question was, well, from the physicians was, well, what do we do about it? Which is still a question that a lot of physicians have now. But at least things got going, and I started doing stories, and then a few other people started doing stories, and people started hearing about it. And that's when I started ACEs Too High and ACEs Connection, because I was working as an editor in a newspaper at that time, but doing stories about the ACE study, because they kept putting out research papers. But in 2009, they put out a research paper that showed the link between people had 6 or more ACEs, lost 20 years off their life. And I said, I got to do something here.
Yeah.
And so it took me 3 years, but I started ACEs Too High, and I started ACE, which is a news site for the general public. And I started ACEs Connection, which is a social network for people who are working or very interested, advocating, whatever, but involved with spreading the word about ACEs science and integrating into their lives, working lives or personal lives. So, and it's, I started on a wing and a prayer, and then later I got some wonderful funding from the California Endowment and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a couple of other foundations. So it's been quite a journey, and I'm very honored to be able to do this work. The almost 50,000 members of ACEs Connection now are doing some stunning things. And we have 300 communities that have community sites on ACEs Connection. They all have ACEs initiatives in these cities and towns and counties. So it's been, it's great. And I'm completely blown away every day by things that I learn that people in the community are doing.
It's just fantastic. And I mean, anybody who has gone to either of those sites will be blown away, because the volume of information, it is just so fantastic to be able to really dig into this and learn about this, and that it's just explosive, absolutely explosive. And I have been particularly interested in this because of trauma, and because my foundation is dedicated to trauma sensitive awareness. And I think that this is the example where you have made people very aware, and you have helped them to help other people make people aware and be able to take action, and to have a dialogue and a connection. And it's just remarkable. And through this whole experience, the ACEs study and how many you have, there are really, I think the initial thought when you think about a childhood adverse experience, you might think, oh, somebody got beaten, or somebody got stabbed, or you think of something that is hugely dramatic. I didn't think of a lot of the things on that list, particularly um, as being, sort of not being seen, not being heard, those types of things. I didn't really think of them as being an adverse childhood experience, but they are. Of course they are, and when someone dies, you think, well, yes, that's a trauma, that's terrible, but I don't know, is that in the category? And then once you realize, wow, there are a lot of really normal things that can happen. And what it's, to me, it has completely changed psychology, psychotherapy, and being able to understand what is at the root of these problems. One of my favorite things, one of my many favorite things that Daryl Hammond said was when he was asked in his interview about how did he feel when he realized that at the root of all this suffering that he had gone through his life, that's just so profound and so incredibly presented in the film Cracked Up. He said when I got that news, it was like the Glory Hallelujah choir when he realized that it was trauma, that it wasn't his fault. And the horror of the fact that he had been misdiagnosed and felt shame and blame and had taken all of these drugs and they were all missing the mark. And I think that this is probably, to me, the biggest gift is that for all of the people that have suffered from some kind of mental injury or emotional injury, very likely at the root of that is going to be trauma. And it's going to be one or more of these ACEs. And so psychotherapy and talk therapy, that's how are you feeling today, is not helping. As in Justin's case, he had no idea that all that stuff was relevant and that it was all coming together. And it came together when he was traumatized on another level through war. So I think getting rid of the shame, that is such a huge blessing to realize it's not your fault. And as Dr. Bruce Perry said in his in the 60 Minutes interview that he did with Oprah Winfrey, and they discussed it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Right.
And asking that question just opens up the whole world of compassion for somebody to realize that they're not acting this way because they're a bad person or want to, but that something happened. So one of these things may have happened. Many of these things may have happened.
Right. And I think that if I could
please
touch on something that you said, I think it's important for people to understand the commonality of many of those 10 ACEs. But since the ACE study was done, those ACEs have been expanded. So
yes,
now we have ACEs in the household, which are more than those 10. We have ACEs in the environment, violence in the community, discrimination, racism, structural racism. We have ACEs in the environment, the pandemic we're going through now. Mm-hmm. So all those interact with each other in a flow, a cascading flow. So if you don't have any intervention, you're just not only are you going to keep suffering and probably keep suffering worse, but your family and your children will as well. You pass these things on. You pass ACEs
absolutely
on if there's no intervention. Mm-hmm. And the what we're trying to do is, well, actually, before I go there, I finish one other thing that you said that I wanted to touch on is that there's 4 key points that people understand when they learn about ACEs. They weren't born bad. What they did when they were, or what happened to them when they were kids, they had no control over. And you'd be surprised how many people well into their 30s or 40s or 50s will say, oh, gee, it was my fault. My parents got divorced. And it's like, what? You were 2. How could that be? And then third is the way you coped with all this trauma and all these ACEs was perfectly appropriate, given that you were not giving anything that was healthy to help you cope.
Right.
You know, so you drank, you did drugs, you did thrill sports, you were an overachiever, whatever. You know, you gained a lot of weight, you were bulimic. All of that is intertwined with this coping mechanisms that we use. And you know, and in many ways it's a good thing, because otherwise you die. You know, people give up.
Right.
And the 4th thing is you can heal.
Yeah.
You know, the brain is plastic, the body wants to heal. It's really pretty wonderful. But the thing that we have to do is not only take this into our own lives, but then change our organizations and systems.
Yes.
Because we have to move from getting people change their behavior by use of blame, shame, and punishment, or scads of information, which usually doesn't work, to understanding, nurturing, and healing. And all of our systems, all of our organizations have to make that shift. And when they do, you know, people are happier, we get our problems solved. You know, schools don't have to suspend kids anymore. Families get healed in safe babies courts. You know, it's amazing the things that have been done.
It is. It's just it is such a huge impact that one person has on one person that's suffering from ACEs will have. And I think that I had heard that you can be impacting 7 generations before are impacting you, and you are impacting 7 generations to come. And that's a lot of people. You know, it's just incredible. And I think when you're looking at your own experience and the ACEs that you've had in your family, you may look at your parent and say, oh, well, that may explain their behavior and why they were doing what they were doing. And any sense that this is weakness or something to be blamed that's just like irrelevant. It's once you understand what it is, then to be able to go about the healing process. And that's one thing that Justin said. Once I knew that actually did have an impact on me, and that I didn't have to be shamed by it. And that's something I think that's really important too, is the ability to talk about this, that these things occurred without any kind of stigma. And to be able to say, this happened to me, it's a fact. And not to feel like I can't discuss it. And I am encouraging through this summit, we have really tried to help veterans understand the importance of not only looking into their own lives and how they're medicating, why they're medicating, and self-medicating, I should say, but how their behavior when they come home, if they are suffering from PTS, to encourage them to recognize that that's also a wound, and it is not something that has anything to do with being brave or a warrior or courageous. And so their willingness to get help for themselves is going to not only impact their life individually and their ability to heal and feel better and have more compassion for themselves, it's also going to impact the outcome of their children's well-being for the rest of their lives. It's not so this idea of suck it up, which is very military, suck it up, get over it. So you had that happen, big deal. It is a big deal. And I think Nadine Burke Harris, I have her TED Talk on the website, our foundation website, where she's talking about the impact for not just mental health, but physical health. And that you mentioned that you can take 20 years off your life by ignoring all of this. Can you address that a little bit more so that they can understand that not only are they affecting their physical life in terms of how that might impact physical issues like cancer or things that you would just not think would be related, but also the impact on their children, not only their physiology, but the development of their brains themselves, which is so astonishing to me.
Yeah.
If you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think what's very interesting is that generally speaking, people who have higher ACE scores are going to have a little more trouble healing. It makes sense. If your body and brain have been assaulted for all these many years by this runaway stress response that happens when you have a high ACE score, it's going to take longer to recover. So I think that's very important, because some people will recover fairly quickly, once they get this, but others take more time. And I think you have to be patient with yourself and others, and say, some people, it just takes a lot longer than others, and there's no rushing it. It just has to happen as it has to evolve. And as far as passing this on to their kids, that's really important. And I would say, if I were a vet and I learned this, I would make sure that there were a lot of aunts and uncles, whether they're blood aunts and uncles or not. Anyways, some kind of other adult figures, several adult figures who figure as helpers or guiders for the kids, because I think that it's unreasonable to ask people who have a lot of trauma in their childhood and a lot of trauma in their adult life to be as present as they need to be for their kids. It's just too much, especially if you're just learning this and you're just starting the healing process.
That's
so
a good point.
The more that you can build in those supports for yourself as well as for your family, the better that everybody will turn out.
That's such a good point. And there was an interview I did with, and I've mentioned this in other interviews because it really touched me. Mary Cortani is a canine trainer who has Operation Freedom Paws, I believe, is the foundation that she has, and forgive me if I got that wrong, I'll correct it. But Mary was telling me about a veteran who had come back and had an episode where he had acted out, I think in his sleep. And before he had gone away to combat or to theater, I think is how she referred to it, his daughter was his little darling. She was daddy's little girl. And when he came back, he was a different man. And just as you're saying, they cannot, they're doing as well as they can. What he did is he went to work with Mary and got a service dog. And what Mary does through her foundation is she trains the veteran to train the dog. And the entire family is involved in this part of the process. And the veteran came to Mary, and they do have therapists that are available on staff, mental health providers. But the veteran came to Mary and said, could you help me explain to my daughter that I don't want to be this way and that I'm trying to get better? And I just was so moved. Mary said that they sat down and they talked, and she explained to the daughter that the dog will be working with daddy.
Mm.
And so whenever daddy's having a hard day, you can rely on the dog, because the dog will tell you that daddy is having a hard day. So that she would have the sense of comfort that it wasn't her, and that she would stay out of the line of any kind of episode, but that this healing presence was available. In this case, it's a dog, but like you're saying, it could be a relative, it could be any kind of support system that takes that pressure off of the veteran who's trying to heal. But the fact that that veteran had that awareness of how his trauma was impacting his child, and how he was trying to communicate to her, and having Mary help him communicate to her that he was going to be okay. He was working on this. And I just thought that was really, really beautiful. And I think understanding that this is having an effect, that the trauma that the veteran may have had, in addition to what they have from the combat and from their service in the military, for them to understand the impact that has on their children, is not for them to feel blame or shame, but to simply understand that this is a deployment. When you leave a child and you feel horrible about it, you don't want to do it. You don't want to dwell in the guilt department as much as you want to say, okay, this does have an effect, and this is how we will learn how we can handle that, so that this child will have a healthy sense of safety, understanding, and all of the ingredients and tools that will help address that. And that's one of the reasons that I felt it was so important to have this entire ACEs discussion, because it enables them to understand that nobody's to blame. They are serving and giving their lives for this country. And they should not have to have that burden of guilt that is impacting their child without their having any intention of doing that. And it also helps for them in their marriages and in their relationships with their spouse, with adults, for them to start to be free of the stigma of all of this, all of the trauma. And I think that education is the key. And through your ACEs connection, which is the social network side, right? And then ACEs Too High is the news side. So are you learning sort of the cutting edge studies on the ACEs Too High site? Is that where you would go if you want to know what's happening with children and how do they recover, and neuroscience in relation to this? Is that how someone could go explore this?
Actually, if people have very deep interest, I would say ACEs Connection is the place to go, because you can,
Okay.
we have much more content there. And it does get into the weeds, and, the people like getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
And ACEs Too High is for People usually don't come straight to ACEs Too High. They're linked or referred there. And somebody sees an article and then, spread all around social media or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's more just to, it seems it has been for people just to get acquainted with ACEs science through stories about what's happening in different sectors. Some of that is research, and some of it is just people who are doing things like creating trauma-informed schools or integrating ACEs science into their opioid family practice, and the how safe babies courts, have really changed things. So they're longer feature pieces there, and some percentage of those people who read those stories, and there are millions who have, will say, I'm really interested in this. I want my kid's school to integrate this, so I'm going to send this to the school board, and then they get interested in seeing what's happening on ACEs Connection. Are there schools who are doing this? Well, we can point them to all kinds of schools that are integrating this if the schools in their community aren't. And in fact, pretty much now, I would say that every sector has had pioneers in ACEs science, and they've integrated ACEs science into the work they're doing, and they've made huge differences. I think, as I mentioned, there are schools that no longer have to suspend or expel kids, and the kids are much happier, and their test scores and grades are better, and the graduation rates are higher. In this, in Plymouth County, Massachusetts, they integrated health and social services with police, and that what they do is, if someone overdoses, then someone, plainclothes person from the police department or sheriff's department, and a social worker goes to that person's house and says, you're having problems. You wouldn't be doing this if you weren't having problems. We have a place for you in this trauma-informed rehab place, and I can take you there right now. And how about I buy you dinner on the way?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is just incredible.
Right. And their opioid death rate dropped something like 25%, a little more than that. Whereas the county right next to them, where they didn't have this program, deaths went up 84%. So it's just astounding what happens when you integrate this knowledge. And on ACEs Connection, we can do stories about it. We can have the people who have been doing this on the site. They can talk to each other. They can say, okay, I want to do this in my community. How do I do it? So we provide all that guidance and information. And the other thing we do is with the communities that we start, ACEs initiatives, we help launch or they join us after they launch and they hear about us, is that we provide all sorts of supports and guidelines for them to get more organizations involved in integrating ACEs science, so that, the goal is that every organization and every community learns about this and integrates it into what they're doing.
It's incredible. And it's global too, right? I mean, it's just extraordinary. I mean, it makes you want to cry. It's sort of like the key to the universe, and you have provided, the key to get in to know this incredible information. Is it, let's say somebody came to you and said, gosh, I really would love to be a trainer, to go to places and teach schools. And do you have anything like that where someone can volunteer and say, I want to take a handbook and go out and and spread the gospel. Is there something like that where you enable people to be cheerleaders for that?
Yeah, and a couple of ways. One, mostly we convince people to become involved in their own community, and if there isn't an ACEs initiative there, to work with some others and other sectors to start one.
Okay.
And when you start one, we have a whole set of guidelines on what to do to get going and how to do presentations. And on the site, on the network, we have lots of resources for that. But if this is something you're really passionate about and you want to do as a living, we have a map on ACEs Connection, and the movement bar right at the top. And one of the maps is it's a speakers and trainers bureau. So you can see who's doing this training. And if if you're really interested in doing it full-time or part-time, you can contact them and say, how'd you do it? Do you need anybody else? How can I train for this? There's actually quite a bit of training going on now, and quite a few speakers now offering their services.
Oh, that's just wonderful. It's really, really exciting. I wanted to cover one other thing that you said that there were myths about the ACEs studies, and what might that be that someone might so we avoid those.
So one of the myths that we started seeing pop up was that it's just these 10 ACEs. And it's not, it's anything that causes toxic stress. And I sent you this infographic that shows the 3 realms of ACEs.
Yes, which I would like to show because it's just fantastic.
And that's on ACEs Connection, but we keep saying, no, it's way more than those 10. It's, I think the World Health Organization has an ACE survey, and I think they have over 30. So it's anything that causes long-term toxic stress, and if there's no intervention, it happens to a kid and they aren't given any guidance or assistance by a caring adult, and it lasts for weeks or months and there's no recovery. That's going to be an ACE, no matter what it is. So, that's the point, is to understand how this works in it. And if it happens to a kid, it depends on the recovery that the kid is provided, on how that kid will do, and if this is going to do long-term damage. There have been lots of instances that I've learned about where 2 kids have had sexual abuse, and one had horrible long-term consequences and one didn't. And the difference between the 2 was that the parents got in there right away. It was a boarding school where this happened. And one set of parents got in there right away, had an open conversation, with their kid, went to the school, said, get rid of that person. And the kids saw that he was cared for, and that there were consequences for the bad things that were done with him, and that he could recover and was given support to recover. And it wasn't a secret. The other one, he never said anything about it. The school kept it secret. That person just disappeared, but it was never talked about. And 20 years later, that guy's still dealing with it.
Yeah.
So it makes all the difference what happens at the time.
Just amazing. And the as you had mentioned earlier about the physical, this is related not just mentally, but it's related to actual disease.
Yeah.
And I think that's something people just can't imagine. This is really not something you can just get over and ignore. You simply can't.
Right.
Like Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. Oh yeah. and in a big way. And people may not realize that the physical ailments that they are suffering from are rooted in this kind of issue. What are the issue is in the tissues, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so it is really major. It is absolutely life changing for a child. Certainly, it's going to change the development of their brain, how they see the world, the shape of their brain, the physiology of their brain, but also for adults who are struggling with problems that they haven't had any resolution to, might need to just slow down and take a look and see what might be going on here that I have, that is coming out in my body, that is actually my body trying to tell me something, to get the message. Um, and that even can be turned around, right? That the health issues that you might be headed for, let's say, if you are in your late 20s and you had several ACEs, you can do something about that
You
so that it
can,
doesn't affect your body.
to a point,
Right,
you can
right.
do a lot of self-care and healing, but where you, and I also should say, it's not just mental, physical, but it's also your social interactions. You know, you
Yes,
have a healthier social interactions if you don't feel bad about yourself. And also it has economic implications. People who have high ACE scores have more jobs, lower incomes. I mean, it just goes on and on. But the why I say to a point is because there are still some things that are happening that in our society that we have to change so that that doesn't continue. And certainly racism, discrimination
absolutely.
is a huge one. We have to get rid of systemic racism for the people who are being discriminated against. And in this country, it's mostly Blacks, and it's also any other minority,
Yes.
don't have to live with that anymore because it's uh, it's it's so damaging, continue to be damaging. So we have to really work hard at changing our systems to be anti-racist.
Mm-hmm. And it seems that the more people understand of the impact of this, the more that will change, hopefully. That understanding, it is daunting, but it is exciting. And I, I am just so grateful to you for making this all possible for people to really get to know about all of this. um, it's just extraordinary. If you were going to give sort of a closing word to, let's say there's a veteran that is struggling and thinking, you know, I don't know how to put this together, I can't make it another day, um, what would you say to help them with that thought? Let's put it that way.
I would say find others like you, and certainly you can find those people on ACEs Connection.
Yeah.
Because once you see that you're not alone, that really goes a long way to helping. And that there are other people who have recovered. And also to give yourself plenty of space and room and patience and, your own nurturing and forgiveness, all of that, because your reactions are real. What happened to you as a child wasn't your fault. The things you experienced in the field also are pinging everything that happened to you when you were a kid. So I would say, find others like you and be really patient.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jane. This has just been absolutely fabulous. I have really been looking forward to it, and I certainly will enjoy exploring more and more in this incredible realm that you have made so accessible to all of us. Thank you. It's really a blessing, all that you have done.
No, thank you, Jane. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.